I'm going to be talking about one of the most iconic things in LA, which is smog. We're going to be talking about smog now. I don't think smog warrants its own episode because it's not boring, but we're not going to talk about smog for that very long. But smog definitely is something that it's a defining characteristic of Los Angeles. And
it's all people care about.
Yeah, it's all they come here for.
Yeah.
I have a postcard of just brown haze. Yeah, our air is toxic. It's really bad for us. And the root of the problem is also tied to what defines our city and the landscape, but I'll get to that in a bit. The 40s was the worst decade for smog in LA. They refer to it as severe smog. There's actually a day, they tracked it down to a day when smog first really introduced itself to the city. It's July 26, 1943. There's pictures of it too.
Oh my God, it's like almost the anniversary today that we're recording this.
Oh, but you're right.
And I didn't get smog anything. Oh. Do you have any tires I can burn? Make a sacrifice to smog.
To commemorate the anniversary, I didn't get a smog check. You're welcome.
I ripped out the catalytic converters out of every car that I've seen.
It's just a sham anyways. They're just trying to make more buck. Who cares if the sky looks like diarrhea? But the city suffered from smog like long before this. Industrial smoke and fumes were so thick during one day in 1903 that residents mistook it for an eclipse of the sun. Rubes.
They really knew nothing about anything back then.
They were just sitting on top of factories, just like, whatever.
Is the earth in the sky today? Yes, mother.
Go back in your hole.
Please, I have to build a Model T. I'm creating automobiles, mother.
Now, Hank, you get off that factory now.
I told you, mother. I am Henrik.
Heinrich Ford, I've told you several times.
And history will remember me as Heinrich Fjord.
From 1905 to about 1912, City Council adopted several measures to combat these dense smoke emissions that they hadn't really figured out what they were yet. As we move through the decades, so the city starts to sprawl and industry starts to boom. The city starts pushing for these air pollution control measures, although, like I said, they didn't really have an idea what smog was yet. It was just, you couldn't see the mountains for some reason.
We need more visible mountains.
So World War II happens. Every story we have to hit World War II or the riots.
End of depression.
Our depression. World War II dramatically increases the city's industrial base, and that results in more air pollution. The city's population and motor vehicle fleet grew rapidly as well, more cars on the road. One of the most defining things about LA is how we're all sprawled out. It's distance. And the whole thing is like, well, if you get a car, you can go anywhere you want. That trolley's not going to take you. When we build these freeways, that trolley's not going to get you anywhere. As a result, according to weather records, visibility starts declining between 1939 to 1943. Pollutant smoke was so dense and pervasive, it constituted as a serious menace to aviation. They considered moving an airport. I forget what, Pomona, I think they considered moving the spot because they couldn't see because the smog was so dense. July 9th, 1943, thousands of people in downtown LA were so bothered by the burning, stinging eyes that they telephoned the police department to ask if aircraft plants were carrying out smoke screen tests, which they did during World War II. The director of war activities, though, of the police department reported that there was no smoke test being conducted, and this mysterious airborne irritants quickly dissipated. But 3 weeks later, the city experienced the worst of the smog events of the 40s. So it happens, like I said, July 26, 1943. Happy birthday. Residents of LA suspected that was chemical warfare attack from the Japanese.
Oh my God.
I know. The brown smeared fog that hung over downtown was irritating folks' eyes. Their nose was running. They were suffering from headaches. There's an oppressive brown cloud right over downtown LA. It lasted for 4 hours and it was so thick that it limited visibility from up to 3 blocks. And it caused all these health problems. Many complained of, like I said, eye irritation. They had respiratory difficulties. They were coughing. Some were vomiting, and people were getting nauseous.
Sounds like any day in downtown LA.
Yeah. Have you been down Los Angeles Street? It's not very nice. Looking for a scapegoat, they blamed the SoCal Gas Company's Aliso Street plant for the thick clouds because they were a manufacturer of this ingredient known as butadiene. They manufactured this ingredient for synthetic rubber called butadiene, and they thought that was...
What's that name?
Butadiene.
Say it again.
Butadiene. So much singing. Yeah, that happened the next day. The very next day, they're already like, it's at Aliso Street plant. That's the one that's doing it. So they closed it. Completely shut down the plant.
And it's that monster they've created. It's that Frankenstein fellow that plays the organ at the downtown theater district.
So that same year, people were so bothered by this thick cloud that they still hadn't figured out what it was called. That was his first introduction to LA. Was this day in 1943?
It was his coming out party.
His coming out, his debut.
I'm ready for my close-up.
LA created the Smoke and Fire Commission to study the problem, and in 1945, the city issues the first air quality regulations banning the burning of trash in suburban backyards, which is something people used to do, apparently.
I know at least one person that still does that.
Really?
Yes.
I'm gonna ask questions off mic.
Yeah.
Definitely.
Yeah.
I have a lot of trash that could burn.
I am living.
I got a lot of evidence. I got to burn up a lot of bloody clothes.
The sanitation department striking my house.
So after they close the Aliso Street plant, they spend like $1.5 million in a couple of years later to kind of bring it back, but they eliminate all the butadiene fumes from that place. I guess they rerouted the way it pumps out into the air.
They just pumped it straight into the water supply instead. You don't want it in the air? Drink it.
I'll tell you where to go. So it's learned in 1947 that this mysterious fog was actually coming from us, our cars, like the symbol of living in Los Angeles. The fumes from the tailpipes were the source of the smog problem, and the brown hue was a product of the ozone, which was when like partially unburned exhaust from the automobiles and the hydrocarbons from oil refineries are hit by sunlight. It creates that brown haze.
Imagine the revelation. It was us all along.
It's the best Twilight Zone episode.
After they kicked all Japanese people out of the city. All Japanese people and gas suppliers.
They had to take all these big buses over to like Santa Anita, and it was just pumping smoke. And they're like, nope, it's the Japs that are doing it.
The bus doesn't look like that when I'm in it.
So like I was saying, sprawl leads to distance. You know, the more we sprawl, the bigger the city gets, which allows for overpopulation, and that leads to traffic. There's so many people on the road. We all have our own cars, and there used to be like advertisements like, there's a car for every household, every member of the family, you know?
Even Junior.
All these things are tangled up from the very thing that makes, like I was saying, the city unique, like our sprawl, our distance, our cars that get us around, all this. That's why smog is like a defining characteristic, because it's all tied to what makes our city.
What it is. We can't have one without the
other. Very rich children. Also about the city, like you brought up before, we have a long history of like bragging about our fresh air and how proud we are of it. Around coastal areas, it might seem fresh. You know, Kinney went to Venice to and it cured his asthma, but smog still looms over overpopulated areas like Vernon and Maywood. I think Vernon is where it's very industrial. It's densely populated. It smells really funky because of the Farmer John meatpacking building. It's one of those areas that just produces a lot of smog. It's a heavy industrial area. If you look at photos of smog in the 40s, it really shows how much of a beast it was. Like, I don't think it's as bad now as it was then.
Yeah, I think it's supposed to be getting better.
Yeah, it's supposed to be
getting... Because I drive a hybrid. That's why.
Hybrids are the problem. Hybrids are the problem. Yeah, I was looking at the pictures. I'm like, this is the Dust Bowl. It looks like the Dust Bowl. Like, you can barely see buildings.
The smog cup.
Smog cup. Some days were so bad that parents decided to keep their kids home from school. Athletes took their training indoors. Farmers found their crops withering away from the toxic air. People were flocking to doctors.
Did they affect the navel oranges?
No, they made them stronger. That's how we.
I want them gone.
I want them gone. I don't care what it takes. You got to make it snow. You got to make it smog. Whatever you got to do, do it.
Brown snow.
Anyways, I could make brown snow. I could make yellow snow, but I prefer to make brown snow. People were flocking to doctors' offices. The people who already had respiratory problems were going in. They're all short of breath. Their eyes were irritated. They also said it smelled like bleach, which I thought was weird because it certainly doesn't smell like bleach. Bleach.
Maybe it wasn't smog. Maybe it actually was the Japanese.
They got us.
So now we're out of the Italian-American Historical Society.
Japanese Americans are not going to like us. No.
The Smog American Historical Society.
Smog Americans.
Smog the Dragon Historical Society.
We're giving enough airtime. What else does Smog want? We remembered its birthday.
Any publicity is good publicity for a dragon.
In 1954, the members of the Highland Park Optimist Club, Optimist like glasses, not Optimist like they feel good, Optimist Club attended a banquet wearing smog gas masks. There's a picture of it. It's really neat. They even had a Miss Smog fighter of 1951, Helene Stanley. This was done to get support for anti-smog measures, but I'm sure she took it very seriously. Very, very seriously. Through the 50s and 60s, LA was getting a lethal amount of smog for about like 200 days of the 365 days of the year.
That's it?
That's it. It's only like an overwhelming amount of days that we had to suffer it. That's when you can start seeing color photos of that era, and it really does identify this like brown orange haze. It does look really disgusting. In like those old Kodachrome film, it looks really bad.
But then again, it makes the sunsets look really nice.
It does make sunsets look really nice.
I mean,
because the air above us is burning because it's toxic.
You got to pick one or the other. Do you want to live in a nice city or a nice city?
Over the following decades, and to this day, really, we do the best we can to limit air pollutants. It's still a real problem. It's always going to be, like, it's just the way the city works now.
Until we go more electric.
Until we go more electric, until we have jetpacks, although what's the jetpacks going to run on? LA is doing a lot better than other places because we're so eco-friendly here. But still, like, you can't get all the cars on the road to be electric, so it's still going to be a problem.
We're very eco-friendly, but it's still like, it's like a pig wearing makeup.
It's like a pig wearing makeup.
We're good. We're eco-friendly.
I want to go to prom. So in 1974, after Upland, California, not LA, but I apologize. We sprawl out for this one.
I'm going to tune out for a little bit.
After Upland. Sing Randy Newman. In 1974, after
too much singing.
In 1974, after Upland had the nation's last Stage 3 smog alert, Governor Ronald Reagan, the actor, Governor Ronald Reagan urged everyone to, limit all but necessary auto travel and take it slow on the road, drive a little slower. Maybe that'll help.
Unless you're going to the Jelly Belly factory. In that case, pedal to the metal. Fill it up with coal. We got to get there quick.
The 70s also sees the Clean Air Act come into place, which aimed at limiting emissions from both industrial plants and motor vehicles. We created it in California, and later it's going to be adopted by the entire country. In 1984, that's when they began the California Smog Check program. That every time you register your car, want to renew your tags, they make you have your car certified to ensure your car is emitting low levels of toxic pollutants instead of just like you said, a coal burning train. In 89, they began pushing for carpooling and public transport for citizens to get around, as well as electric vehicles, which were primitive at the time, but they were still coming around. In 1990, President George Bush, #1, he signed the Clean Air Act amendments for the entire country, which were based on, like I said, our Clean Air Act that we had. A desired effect was to curb ozone, acid rain, and toxic pollutants. And it seemed to have worked because, although if you watch enough 90s TV, they always have that shot of downtown and it's just ugh.
Mordor.
It's Mordor. Despite all these pushes to get the air clean, it's still a major cause of a lot of health problems, particularly in more urban areas because it's just a lot of people in smaller areas and they're always industrial.
What do you mean by urban?
You know that I mean minority areas.
Oh, you mean where you live?
Used to. It used to be one of those places. Now it's Junior Silver Lake. In 1987, they conducted lung autopsies on over 1,100 people who were killed in auto accidents or that were murdered. And they found that 27% of them had severely damaged lungs.
So then there's a link. The killer must have been Ronald Reagan.
I would have got away with it if it wasn't for you pesky kids. And that smog up there. In 2001, USC conducted a survey of the health of over 1,700 young children and found that over an 8-year period, those who lived in smoggy conditions were 5 times more likely to have low-level lung function. Childhood asthma rates have risen as high as 14% in those smoggy areas. 2005, they did a statewide survey and found that 9,600 people die from air pollution-caused ailments every year. You compare that to 3,200 who die in car crashes and 2,000 who are murdered. There's about 3,400 trucks, 16 ships that arrive daily at LA and Long Beach ports. They create more than a third of air pollution with very little regulation as far as I can tell. There's that. Have you ever been on the 710 freeway going to Long Beach? It's just those big shipper trucks and they're just pumping it out. And many say that traffic is going to quadruple in 20 years. So you got that going for you.
Perfect.
We have it better now, like I said, but it's still bad. We're working against the smog because there's a lot of citizen activism and there's a lot of scientific advances in emissions. There was a landmark environmental legislation passed which allows the EPA to regulate air pollutants. So we have a lot, like I said, going on. LA's very eco-friendly. They're very conscious of our health and stuff, but smog's not going anywhere. Smog
Good.
City. Good. It's no longer, I don't think it's top 10 in the world anymore, but we are #1, I'm pretty sure, in our country. I think China takes the cake.
I guess that feels good.
Finally, China wins something.
We're #1 in a lot of awful things in LA.
Yeah, we are. Headshots.
The headshot capital of the world.